So jumping into chapter 11, where we're going to look at one of the main models that we'll be using for the next 3 or 4 chapters, the aggregate demand, aggregate supply model. But first, we're going to kind of just talk about how do macroeconomics or macroeconomists look at supply and demand of global, national, state markets. And so really they're divided into 2 groups. The first group says that supply is the most important determinant of the size of the macroeconomy. So it's the most valuable player in determining the size of the economy. And implied in this is the fact that, demand just tags along. So, falsely attributed to a historical economist named Jean-Baptiste Say, the people that believe this are usually quoted by saying supply creates its own demand, which is called Say's law. Again, not really accurately quoted, but for the sake of having some sort of convention rather than none, we still use it. Those people would be called the neoclassicist macroeconomists. Compare that to the more Keynesian leaning of our macroeconomic fellows, who feel that demand is the most important factor in the size of a macroeconomy. And again, the implicit subcontext here is that supply just tags along. What we will learn is that the most successful economic approach integrates both of these things. Integrates both of the perspectives. Because as we'll learn, we'll have chapters on both the neoclassical and the Keynesian perspective. Some of these things are more appropriate at other times and different other circumstances than others. So again, let's get that Say's law into your notes. Say's law is stated as supply creates its own demand. Every time a good or service is produced and sold, it represents some income to somebody. So that's the underlying mechanism here. And this has also been, kind of extended to talk about, just how much marketing plays into consumption. Yes, there are some things which we simply need: water, food, shelter, clothing, right? We don't have them, we can't survive, or we get put in jail. It's like Maslow hierarchy of needs kind of stuff. But a lot of stuff has to be marketed to us, has to be advertised to us. So, part of these neoclassical arguments, is that, the existing mechanism is enough to stimulate the demand without any extra from the outside in terms of market interfering behavior, which is a little foreshadowing to talking about the Keynesians. So I've been talking about neoclassical and Keynesians for a while. Let's get a definition in here. So neoclassical economists are essentially people that believe in Say's law, right? They emphasize the importance and priority of aggregate supply. Let's just start using the acronym right now. We're going to be using it a lot. Aggregate supply in determining economic size in the long run. And this in the long run part is important. So again, just some foreshadowing for when we talk about Keynesian economics. So Say's law says supply creates its own demand. And, you know, it does a decent approximation. It does a decent approximation. That's English. For the long run. So it's the notion that over years, over decades really, as the productive power of an economy to produce and supply goods and services from different businesses increases, well, then automatically, if the prices increase, then the wages have to increase, right? And then when the wages increase, that means that people are going to buy more stuff. And so they say that supply creates its own demand. In the long run, the productive power increases, and with total demand, in the economy growing at roughly the same pace. So it holds water in the long run. However, as John Maynard Keynes said, in the long run, we're all dead. In periods of dire economic situations, over shorter horizons, like, you know, months or years, recessions and depressions occur. In which firms, as a group, seem to lack that magical demand that's just supposed to automatically show up. Whereas we can compare this to Keynes's law. Which states that demand creates its own supply. So Keynes is saying The level of GDP is not primarily determined by the potential of what the economy can supply, but rather the amount of total demand. Keynes's law applies well in the short run. So from months to years. When many firms experience a drop in their demand during a recession or something like that, or they have so much demand that they have trouble producing enough during an economic boom. However, the reality of the situation is that if demand was all that matters, governments could just make the economy larger by just increasing government spending ad infinitum, right? Or making large tax cuts to push up consumption. So we'll come back to this point at the beginning of class on Monday, that economies do face genuine limits to how much they can produce. All right, let's do our Kahoot real quick.